The diamond ring hissed and cracked in the fireplace flames, turning black before Caleb Harlow's cold eyes. 47 proposals rejected. 47 women who wanted his fortune, not his heart. At 36, the wealthiest rancher in Montana had sworn off love forever, until a barefoot stranger in a torn dress appeared on his mountain trail asking for absolutely nothing. She would either destroy him completely or save what was left of his soul. But first, she'd have to survive the ghost from his past who was already riding back to claim what she'd stolen. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And hit that like button so I know you're ready for this journey. Now, let me tell you how it all began. The Montana wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow across Blackstone Ridge, but inside the massive stone ranch house, all Caleb Harlow could smell was burning metal and his own rage. He stood before the fireplace in his study, watching the diamond ring blacken and warp in the flames. It had cost him $3,000. Not that the money mattered. What mattered was the principle. The ring had been meant for Caroline Whitmore, daughter of the territorial judge, a woman whose smile never quite reached her calculating eyes. She'd been proposal number 47, and like the 46 before her, she'd made the fatal mistake of mentioning his land holdings before she mentioned his name. "Mr. Harlow, sir?" The voice came from the doorway. Marcus Webb, his foreman for the past 8 years, stood with his hat in his hands, weathered face creased with concern. "The boys are asking about tomorrow's roundup. North pasture or east?" Caleb didn't turn from the fire. "North. The east fence line needs another week of repairs before we push cattle through." "Yes, sir." Marcus shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say more. "Spit it out, Marcus." "It's just, the men are talking. They're worried about you." Now Caleb did turn, his gray eyes sharp as flint. "Worried about what?" "About you being alone up here. It's a big house for one man. Your father built it for a family, and my father's dead." Caleb's voice could have cut glass. "And this conversation is over." Marcus nodded slowly, settling his hat back on his head. "As you say, sir. I'll tell the boys north pasture at dawn." He paused at the door. "But for what it's worth, not every woman is Lillian Monroe." The name landed like a physical blow. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Marcus had earned the right to speak his mind, didn't mean Caleb had to listen. When the foreman's footsteps faded down the hall, Caleb poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and dropped into the leather chair by the fire. The ruined ring had stopped smoking. In the morning, he'd sweep the ashes away. Another symbol of another failed attempt at something he no longer believed in. 10 years. 10 years since Lillian Monroe had walked out of his life with his savings, his pride, and his ability to trust. He'd been 26 then, young enough to believe that love conquered all, stupid enough to hand over $8,000 to a woman who claimed she needed to settle her father's debts before they could marry. She'd disappeared on a Wednesday. He still remembered the day of the week. The whiskey burned going down, but not as much as the memories. He'd spent the last decade building walls, not just around his property, but around himself. He'd inherited 12,000 acres from his father and turned it into 45,000. His cattle were the finest in 3 counties. His horses sold for premium prices from Helena to Cheyenne. Politicians sought his endorsement, business owners sought his investment, and women sought his money. They came in carriages and on trains, daughters of merchants and bankers and cattle barons, each one more beautiful and more mercenary than the last. They complimented his house, his land, his vision for the future. They never mentioned the scar on his left hand from a branding iron or the way he sometimes stared out at the mountains for hours without speaking. They saw only what he owned, never who he was. So he'd stopped trying, stopped hoping, stopped believing that somewhere in this territory was a woman who might want him for something other than his assets. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Caleb finished his whiskey and stood, intending to head to bed, when something caught his eye. On his desk, half buried under ledgers and property deeds, was a small wooden box, his mother's box. He hadn't opened it in years. Against his better judgment, he picked it up. The hinges creaked as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in faded blue cloth, was a simple silver locket. His mother had worn it every day until the fever took her when Caleb was 17. His father had given it to him the day after the funeral, then never mentioned her again. Caleb opened the locket.
Two faces stared back at him, his mother and father on their wedding day, young and hopeful and completely unaware that they'd only have 23 years together. His mother was smiling that smile he barely remembered, the one that lit up her whole face. His father looked like he'd won every prize in the territory. They'd loved each other. Caleb had seen it every day of his childhood, the way his father's hand would find his mother's across the dinner table, the way she'd hum while cooking breakfast, and he'd waltz her around the kitchen before the sun was fully up. The way they'd sit together on the porch in the evenings, not always talking, but always together. His father had never remarried. Lightning doesn't strike twice, he'd said once, the only time Caleb had asked. I had my miracle. I won't insult her memory by trying to replace it. Caleb snapped the locket shut and returned it to the box. His parents had been the exception, not the rule. Love like that didn't exist anymore, if it ever really had outside his childhood memories. The world was different now. Harsher. More transactional. Women married for security, men married for heirs and household management. Romance was for dime novels and fools. He was neither. The next morning broke cold and clear, the kind of October day that warned of the brutal winter ahead. Caleb was up before dawn, as always, pulling on his work clothes and boots. He'd given up on fancy attire years ago, except for when business demanded it. Out here, sweat and leather were more honest than silk and gold. Marcus and the men were already saddling horses when Caleb reached the barn. 12 riders, all seasoned ranch hands who'd been with him for years. They knew their work and did it well, which was the only kind of loyalty Caleb cared about anymore. Morning, boss. That was Tommy Reed, barely 22, but one of the best ropers Caleb had ever seen. We're set for the north pasture. Should be able to bring in about 300 head by nightfall. Caleb nodded, checking his own saddle cinch. His horse, a massive bay gelding named Judge, snorted and shifted beneath his hands. Weather's holding, but keep an eye on those clouds to the west. If they start moving in, we cut it short. I won't lose cattle or men to an early storm. Yes, sir. They rode out as the sun crested the mountains, turning the frost-covered grass into a field of diamonds. Caleb loved this part of the day, before the work got hard and the sun got high. Out here, with just the sound of hoofbeats and saddle leather, he could almost forget the emptiness waiting for him back at the house. The roundup went smoothly. The cattle were fat and healthy, ready for market. By mid-afternoon, they'd gathered most of the strays and were pushing the herd toward the holding pens near the southern boundary of his property. Caleb was riding drag, eating dust and keeping the stragglers moving when Marcus appeared beside him. Got a rider coming up the private trail, the foreman said, pointing toward the tree line. Can't make out who it is yet. Caleb squinted against the sun. Sure enough, a lone figure on horseback was making its way up the narrow path that led from the main road to his house. The trail was clearly marked private property, had been for 20 years. People who ignored those signs usually had business they shouldn't be conducting. Could be Edwards from the bank, Marcus suggested. He mentioned wanting to discuss that loan expansion. Edwards drives a buggy and sends a telegram first. Caleb's instincts were prickling. Stay with the herd. I'll handle it. He turned Judge toward the trail, breaking into a canter. As he got closer, details emerged. The rider was small, a woman, he realized. She was riding bareback on a horse that looked half-starved, her dress so faded he couldn't tell what color it had originally been, and she was barefoot, her pale feet stark against the dark hide of her mount. Caleb's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard, then stopped. The woman wasn't armed that he could see, wasn't carrying anything except a small cloth bundle tied behind her saddle. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like trouble of an entirely different kind. He intercepted her about a quarter-mile from his house, moving Judge to block the trail. This is private property. The woman pulled her horse to a stop. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid and eyes the color of creek water in summer. Her face was thin, sharp-boned, but not unkind, and she was looking at him like she'd been expecting someone bigger. You Caleb Harlow? Her voice was low, rough around the edges. Not refined, not practiced. Depends on why you're asking. I'm looking for work. She said it plainly, without artifice. Heard in town you might need someone who can keep books and handle correspondence. I can do both. Caleb almost laughed. I have people who handle that. Do you? She tilted her head slightly. Because the mercantile owner in Blackstone said you've been through 4 bookkeepers in 2 years. Said you can't keep anyone because you're difficult to work with. His words, not mine. Then why would you want the job? Because I need the money, and difficult men don't scare me. Her creekwater eyes held his without flinching. I've survived worse than a rich rancher with a temper. There was something in the way she said it, flat, matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. Caleb studied her more carefully. The dress wasn't just faded, it was mended in at least a dozen places. Her hands, wrapped loosely around the horse's mane, were calloused and scarred, and there was a fading bruise on her left wrist, the kind that came from someone gripping too hard. What's your name? Eliza Brennan? You from around here, Mrs. Brennan? Widow Brennan, she corrected him quietly. And no, I came from Bannock 3 weeks ago. Been staying in a boarding house in town, but my money's running out. Bannock's mining country. What were you doing there? Being married to a miner? Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He died in a collapse 2 months ago. Left me with $14 and a horse. The $14 is now down to $3. Caleb knew he should send her away. He didn't need complications, and a destitute widow was nothing but complications. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way she sat on that half-dead horse with her spine straight and her chin up, like poverty hadn't touched her pride. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't once mentioned his wealth, his land, or anything except the job she was asking for. Or maybe he was just tired of burning rings and pretending he didn't notice the silence in his house. I pay $20 a month plus room and board, he heard himself say. You'd stay in the housekeeper's quarters off the kitchen. Work starts at 7, ends when the work is done. You keep the books, handle supply orders, manage household accounts. I don't tolerate theft, lying, or gossip. Break any of those rules, you're gone. Understood? Eliza's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Relief? Maybe. Or hope. Understood. One more thing. Caleb leaned forward in his saddle. I'm not interested in marriage. Not to you, not to anyone. You're here to work, nothing more. If you have other ideas, ride back down that trail right now. For the first time, something like emotion crossed her face. It might have been amusement. Mr. Harlow, I buried one husband 2 months ago. I'm not in any hurry to acquire another, especially not one who feels the need to clarify that before I've even dismounted. Despite himself, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Fair enough. Follow me. He turned Judge back toward the house, hearing the soft thud of hoofbeats behind him. The ranch house came into view as they crested the hill, 2 stories of Montana stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides and windows that reflected the mountains beyond. It was beautiful in a harsh, uncompromising way, much like the land it sat on. Caleb dismounted in front of the barn and gestured for Eliza to do the same. She slid off her horse with the ease of someone who'd grown up riding, then stood there barefoot in the dirt, waiting. Your feet, Caleb said, nodding toward them. What happened to your shoes? Sold them in Butte for food money. She said it without shame. Feet grow back. Starving doesn't reverse itself. He found himself staring at her, this barefoot woman who spoke about selling her shoes like it was a reasonable business decision. She stared back, unflinching. There's a general store account under my name, Caleb said finally. Take Judge and ride into town. Get yourself boots, proper clothes, whatever else you need. Tell Silas to put it on my tab. I'll pay you back. It's an advance on your wages. Consider it part of the hiring package. Eliza studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't met my filing system. He showed her to the housekeeper's quarters, a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the eastern pasture. It had been empty since Mrs. Patterson left 6 months ago, citing personality differences, which was code for couldn't handle Caleb's bluntness. Supper's at 6, Caleb said from the doorway. Kitchen's through there. You can start work tomorrow morning once you've settled in. I can start now? You can start tomorrow. His tone left no room for argument. Get yourself boots first, then get some rest.
The books will still be a mess in the morning. He left before she could respond, heading back to the barn where Marcus was unsaddling horses. The foreman raised an eyebrow when he saw Caleb leading Eliza's half-starved mount toward a stall. "We taking in strays now?" "New bookkeeper." Caleb grabbed a brush and started working on the horse's matted coat. "She starts tomorrow." "Uh-huh." Marcus's tone was carefully neutral. "And the barefoot part?" "She sold her shoes." "Right, of course she did." The foreman was quiet for a moment. "She got a name?" "Eliza Brennan, widow from Bannock, lost her husband in a mine collapse." "And you believe that?" Caleb paused mid-brushstroke. It was a fair question. 10 years ago, he would have taken her story at face value. Now, after Lillian, after 47 calculated proposals, he didn't take anything at face value. "I believe she needs the job," he said finally, "and I believe she can either keep books or she can't. If she steals from me, she'll regret it. If she lies to me, she's gone. Beyond that, her past is her business." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Marcus shook his head slowly, but he was smiling slightly. "You're either getting soft in your old age or finally getting some sense. Can't tell which." "Neither can I," Caleb admitted. That night, for the first time in months, the ranch house felt different. Not quite less empty. One person couldn't fill that much silence, but different. Caleb ate his supper alone, as usual, in the dining room that could seat 20. Through the window, he could see a lamp burning in the housekeeper's quarters. Eliza was probably unpacking what little she owned, settling into a space that would either become her sanctuary or another temporary stop on whatever road she was traveling. He thought about what Marcus had said earlier. Not every woman is Lillian Monroe. The words had been bouncing around his head all day, uncomfortable and unwelcome, because the truth was he didn't know if that was true or not. Lillian had seemed genuine too, at first. She'd seemed like everything he'd been looking for, until the day she wasn't. Caleb pushed his plate away, the food half-eaten. He was making too much of this. Eliza was an employee, nothing more. She'd keep his books, earn her wages, and eventually move on to whatever life she was building. There was no story here, no complication, no risk. He almost believed it. The next morning, Eliza appeared in the kitchen at exactly 7 o'clock, wearing new boots, a simple gray work dress, and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept much. Caleb was already on his second cup of coffee, reading through a supply manifest that didn't add up right. "Morning," she said. "Coffee's on the stove, cups in the cabinet above it." She poured herself a cup and sat down across from him without asking if she could. It was a small thing, but it said something about her. She wasn't here to defer or simper. She was here to work. "The books are in the study," Caleb said, sliding the manifest across the table. "Start with this. The numbers from the feed supplier haven't matched their invoices in 3 months. I want to know if they're cheating me or if my last bookkeeper was incompetent. Possibly both." Eliza picked up the manifest, her eyes scanning the columns. Her lips moved slightly as she calculated, and Caleb found himself watching the concentration on her face. After a moment, she looked up. "They're shorting you. See here?" She pointed to a line item. "They're billing for premium grain, but the weight calculations match standard feed. You're paying a 30% markup for nothing." Caleb leaned forward, checking her math. She was right. It was buried in enough legitimate charges that it would be easy to miss, but once you saw it, the pattern was clear. "How long did that take you?" "About 90 seconds. She met his eyes. "I'm good with numbers, Mr. Harlow. It's words I struggle with sometimes." "Call me Caleb." "And what do you mean, struggle with words?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "I can read and write fine, but I'm not eloquent. I say things too bluntly. It gets me in trouble. In this house, blunt is preferred. I don't have patience for people who talk around things." He stood, picking up his hat. "I've got fence repairs to oversee. You'll find 3 years of ledgers in the study, all of them probably wrong. Start sorting through them. If you find more discrepancies, make a list." "What will you do with the list?" "Depends on how long it is." His smile was cold. "But people who steal from me learn to regret it." He left her in the kitchen and headed out to meet Marcus and the crew. The day was already warming up, promising to be unseasonably hot. They had 2 miles of fence line to repair before winter, and every day counted. But even as he worked, part of his mind kept drifting back to the house, to the barefoot woman who was now wearing boots he'd bought, sitting at his desk, unraveling the ways people had been cheating him. It was strange having someone in his space again. Strange and uncomfortable and not entirely unwelcome. By the time Caleb returned to the house that evening, covered in dust and sweat, the sun was setting in strips of orange and purple across the mountains. He found Eliza still in the study, surrounded by ledgers and papers covered in her neat handwriting. She looked up when he entered, and he saw exhaustion around her eyes. "I found 17 discrepancies," she said without preamble. 12 vendors overcharging, 3 invoices for goods never delivered, and 2 that appear to be completely fabricated. Your last bookkeeper was either blind or complicit. Caleb picked up her list. The numbers were damning. Thousands of dollars, siphoned away over years. He'd suspected some of it, but seeing it laid out like this made his blood run cold, and then hot with anger. "This one," he pointed to a name, "Jacob Klein. He's the feed supplier. I've been doing business with him for 5 years. He's been stealing from you for at least 3. And this one? Sarah Porter? That's your former bookkeeper." Eliza's voice was quiet. "The fabricated invoices have her signature. She was working with at least 2 of the vendors, possibly more." Caleb set the list down carefully, fighting the urge to put his fist through the desk. Another betrayal. Another person he'd trusted who saw him as nothing but a source of money to be exploited. "You all right?" Eliza's question cut through his fury. "Fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you want to burn the house down." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That obvious? Your jaw's so tight I'm surprised your teeth haven't cracked." She stood, closing the ledger she'd been working on. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're blind. I think you're busy running a ranch, and you trusted people to be honest. That's not a character flaw. Feels like one. Feelings aren't facts." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll start drafting letters to the vendors tomorrow. Give them a chance to explain before you do whatever it is you're planning to do. Some of these might be honest mistakes. And if they're not, then you make them regret it." Her creekwater eyes held his. "But you do it smartly, not angrily. Angry men make mistakes." She was gone before he could respond, leaving him alone in a study full of evidence of his own foolishness. Caleb stood there for a long moment, staring at the list of names. People he'd done business with for years. People he'd considered honest. Lillian had taught him that love couldn't be trusted. Now his vendors were teaching him that business couldn't be trusted either. Was there anything in this world that wasn't transactional? Anyone who saw him as more than a walking bank account? He thought of Eliza, sitting in this study for 12 straight hours, untangling fraud she had no personal stake in. She could have done a cursory review, told him things looked fine, collected her wages. Instead, she dug deep enough to find the truth. Why? The question followed him through supper, through his evening whiskey, through the hours he spent lying awake in bed. Why would a desperate woman with $3 to her name risk alienating her employer by uncovering uncomfortable truths? Any smart opportunist would have hidden the fraud, maybe even participated in it. Unless she wasn't an opportunist. Unless she was exactly what she appeared to be, a widow who needed work and had decided to do it honestly. The thought was almost more unsettling than the fraud. Because if Eliza Brennan was genuine, it meant Caleb had to reconsider his assumption that everyone was out to use him. And that was a dangerous road to start down. 3 days later, Caleb rode into town with Marcus and a saddlebag full of evidence. They went to the feed supplier first. Jacob Klein's smile faded when Caleb laid out the invoices on his counter, showing him side by side with the actual weights delivered. "This is a misunderstanding," Klein stammered. "A bookkeeping error on our end. 3 years of consistent bookkeeping errors." Caleb's voice was quiet, which made it more dangerous. "All in your favor. Interesting pattern. Mr. Harlow, if you'll just let me explain, here's what's going to happen." Caleb leaned against the counter, casual as a snake. "You're going to refund every penny you overcharged me. Then you're going to sell this business and leave this county. If you're still here in 30 days, I'll make sure every rancher within 100 miles knows what you did. Are we clear?" Klein's face went white. That's extortion." "No, that's mercy. Extortion would be having the sheriff arrest you for fraud. Caleb straightened. Clock's ticking, Jacob. I suggest you start packing. They hit 3 more vendors that afternoon. By the time they finished, Caleb had secured refunds totaling just over $4,000 and ruined 4 reputations. He felt no satisfaction in it, only a cold, empty vindication. You're getting soft, Marcus observed as they rode back toward the ranch. Old Caleb would have had them arrested. Old Caleb wasted too much energy on revenge. Caleb stared out at the mountains, bathed in afternoon light. I just want my money back and people who won't steal from me. And the bookkeeper, Sarah Porter? Send her a letter. She has 2 options, return what she stole and leave quietly, or deal with the sheriff. Her choice. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know, I was against hiring the widow, thought it was a mistake. And now? Now I'm thinking she might be the first smart decision you've made in years. Caleb didn't respond, but he didn't disagree either. When they reached the ranch, Eliza was on the porch, sorting through what looked like supply catalogs. She looked up as they dismounted, and Caleb saw the question in her eyes. 4 refunds secured, he said, climbing the steps. 1 more pending. Good. She returned to her catalogs. While you were gone, I reorganized the filing system and found 3 more inconsistencies, smaller ones, but still theft. Of course you did. Caleb shook his head, something that might have been a smile tugging at his mouth. You eat today? Haven't had time. That wasn't a question with a choice in it. Come on. He led her to the kitchen, where he proceeded to make sandwiches while she protested that she could feed herself. But she didn't leave, and when he put the plate in front of her, she ate like someone who'd forgotten what regular meals felt like. They sat in companionable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling with talk. Outside, the sun was dropping toward the mountains, painting everything gold. Inside, for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Harlow sat across from a woman and didn't wonder what she wanted from him. It was terrifying. It was also the most peace he'd felt in a decade. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised them both. Eliza proved herself not just competent, but formidable. She reorganized the entire ranch accounting system, implemented inventory controls that caught discrepancies before they became losses, and negotiated better rates with new suppliers who quickly learned she had no patience for inflated prices. Caleb found himself seeking her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with bookkeeping. When a neighboring rancher proposed a joint grazing agreement, he asked Eliza to review the terms. When the bank offered to refinance his property loans, she was the one who spotted the hidden fees. She had a mind like a steel trap and a directness that cut through pretense, like a hot knife through butter. You're being cheated again, she said one morning, barely looking up from the contract spread across the kitchen table. It was early, the sun just starting to paint the mountains pink, and they'd fallen into the habit of drinking coffee together before the day's work began. Caleb looked over her shoulder at the document. Where? Paragraph 7, subsection 3. See this clause about administrative oversight fees? That's code for we're going to charge you 2% of the total loan value for doing absolutely nothing. She tapped the paper with her pen. On a refinance of this size, that's $800 straight into their pockets. Henderson at the bank recommended this personally. Henderson at the bank is hoping you won't read the fine print. Eliza met his eyes. Do you want my advice, or do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? Your advice. Always your advice. Then tell Henderson to remove the clause, or you'll take your business to the bank in Helena. He'll fold in under 5 minutes. She was right, of course. Henderson removed the clause with barely a protest, just a nervous laugh about standard contract language and simple misunderstandings. Caleb walked out of the bank $800 richer and increasingly aware that Eliza Brennan saw the world with a clarity he'd forgotten was possible. But it wasn't just her competence that unsettled him. It was everything else. The way she hummed while working through ledgers, a tuneless sound that somehow made the house feel less empty. The way she'd started taking her morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains with an expression of such profound peace, it made his chest tight. The way she spoke to his ranch hands with respect, learning their names and asking about their families, until even the most taciturn cowboy would smile when she passed. And the way she looked at him, not with calculation or desire, but with a kind of clear-eyed assessment that suggested she saw past his walls to whatever was underneath, and found it neither threatening nor particularly impressive. Just human. It made him nervous. "You're staring," Marcus said one afternoon. They were repairing fence posts on the southern boundary, and Caleb had let his attention drift to where Eliza stood near the barn, explaining something to Tommy Reed with animated hand gestures. "I'm not staring. I'm observing." "You're staring like a man who's trying to figure out a puzzle he didn't know he was solving." Marcus hammered a post into the ground with more force than necessary. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "About what?" "Don't play stupid. You're many things, Caleb, but stupid isn't one of them." Caleb turned back to his own post, jaw tight. "She works for me, that's all." Keep telling yourself that. Maybe one day it'll be true. But it wasn't true, and Caleb knew it. The problem was he didn't know what it actually was. Eliza wasn't like the 47 women who'd come before her. She didn't flirt, didn't manufacture excuses to be near him, didn't ask about his property holdings or his plans for expansion. She did her work, ate her meals, and treated him with the same straightforward courtesy she showed everyone else, which somehow made her more dangerous than all the others combined. Because Caleb was starting to realize that what he'd been protecting himself from all these years wasn't just gold diggers and opportunists. It was the possibility that he might actually want something real, and the terrifying vulnerability that came with it. October gave way to November, and the first serious snow came early, blanketing Blackstone Ridge in 2 feet of white silence. Caleb woke to find Eliza already in the kitchen, stoking the fire and making coffee, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual braid. "Storm's going to last at least 3 days," she said without preamble. "I checked the supply room. We're fine for food, but we're low on lamp oil, and the woodpile near the house is running thin." "I'll have the boys bring wood up from the main shed after breakfast." "Already did. Started at 5 this morning. Tommy and Marcus helped." She poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one across to him. "You should eat something. You've been skipping breakfast." "I'm fine." "You're running yourself into the ground." Her voice was matter-of-fact, not scolding. "I've watched you work 16-hour days for 6 weeks straight. That's not fine. That's a man trying to outrun something." Caleb wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, feeling the heat seep into his palms. "And what would I be running from? If I knew that, I'd tell you. But whatever it is, it's going to catch you eventually. They always do." There was something in her voice. Experience, maybe, or old pain. Caleb studied her across the steam rising from his cup. Her face was still too thin, though she'd filled out some in the weeks she'd been here. The shadows under her eyes had faded, but there were scars he was only beginning to notice. The way she flinched when doors slammed. The way she never sat with her back to a room. The way she sometimes touched her left wrist absently, fingers tracing the faded bruises that had been there the day she arrived. "What are you running from?" he asked quietly. Eliza's hand stilled on her wrist. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "A man who thought love meant ownership. A marriage that taught me the difference between a ring and a cage. A life I barely survived." "Your husband." "My late husband." The correction was sharp. "He's dead, which means he can't hurt me anymore. But the things he taught me about trust and safety and what happens when you let someone too close, those are still alive." "Is that why you don't hide the scars?" She looked down at her wrist, then back at him. "I don't hide them because pretending they don't exist doesn't make them disappear. Pain doesn't work like that. Neither does healing." The conversation hung between them, heavy with unspoken things. Outside, wind drove snow against the windows in white waves. Inside, the kitchen felt smaller somehow, more intimate. "I'm sorry," Caleb said finally, "for what he did to you." "Don't be sorry, just don't be like him." Eliza stood, carrying her cup to the window. "I've been here almost 2 months now, and you know what I've noticed? You're harder on yourself than you are on anyone else. You hold people accountable for their mistakes, but you hold yourself accountable for being human. That's not strength. That's just another kind of cage. You think you figured me out." I think we're more alike than you want to admit." She turned to face him, backlit by the snow-bright window. "We're both people who learned the hard way that trust is expensive, but there's a difference between being careful and being closed. You've built walls so high you can't see over them anymore." "Those walls have kept me safe." "Safe from what? Being hurt? Being disappointed?" Her voice softened. "Or being human." Before Caleb could answer, the back door flew open and Marcus stumbled in, covered in snow. "We've got a problem. The Hendersons' place just sent a rider. Their barn roof collapsed under the snow weight. They've got 30 head of cattle and nowhere to put them before dark." Caleb was on his feet immediately. "How many men can we spare?" "6, maybe 7, if we pull Tommy off fence detail." "Do it. Load up the wagons with whatever feed we can spare. If we can't get the cattle into shelter, we'll at least keep them fed until the storm breaks." He grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. "Eliza, send word to the other ranchers in the valley. If Henderson's barn went down, others might be at risk." "I'll draft the messages now." She was already moving toward the study. The next 72 hours were brutal. Caleb and his men worked in shifts, helping not just the Hendersons but 3 other families whose structures couldn't handle the early heavy snow. They dug out livestock, redistributed cattle to neighboring barns, and shored up roofs that looked ready to collapse. Eliza became the command center, coordinating between ranches, tracking which supplies went where, and making sure no one's emergency was forgotten in the chaos. She worked from before dawn until after midnight, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. On the 3rd night, Caleb returned to the house to find her asleep at the kitchen table, her head pillowed on a stack of supply manifests. Her pen had rolled from her hand, leaving a small ink stain on her sleeve. She looked younger in sleep, less guarded, and something in Caleb's chest twisted. He stood there for a long moment, just watching her breathe. Then, moving carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She murmured something unintelligible, but didn't wake as he carried her to her room and laid her on the bed, pulling a quilt over her shoulders. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused. "Caleb?" "You fell asleep at the table. The supply orders will still be there in the morning. Sleep." She was already drifting off again, her breathing evening out. Caleb should have left, should have walked back to his own cold room and his own empty bed. Instead, he sat in the chair by her window, watching the snow fall and wondering when exactly he'd stopped being able to lie to himself about what he felt. The storm finally broke on the 4th day, leaving the world crystalline and sparkling under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Caleb was in the barn checking on the extra cattle they'd taken in when Eliza found him. "We got a letter," she said, holding out an envelope. "It was delivered to town 3 days ago, but the roads were too bad for the postal rider until now." Caleb took the envelope, frowning. The return address was from Helena. He opened it, read the contents, and felt his world tilt. "What is it?" Eliza asked. "It's from a law firm. They're representing Sarah Porter, the bookkeeper who stole from me." He looked up from the letter. "She's filed a lawsuit. Claims I defamed her character with false accusations and she's seeking damages." "That's insane. We have documentation of everything she did." "We do. But she's apparently found a lawyer willing to argue that the discrepancies were honest mistakes and my aggressive response to them damaged her reputation." Caleb's hands tightened on the letter. "She's asking for $10,000. She stole from you, and now she's trying to steal more." Eliza's voice was flat with anger. "When's the hearing?" 3 weeks. In Helena." He looked at the letter again, a cold fury building in his chest. This was Lillian all over again. Someone taking from him and then acting like they were the victim. "I'll need to go to Helena, present evidence. Find my own lawyer." "We'll need to go to Helena," Eliza corrected. "I'm the one who found the discrepancies. My testimony will carry weight." "That's not necessary." "Caleb." She stepped closer, her creekwater eyes intense. "Stop trying to handle everything alone. You're not alone anymore. Whether you've noticed or not, you have people who will stand with you. Let them." Something in her words struck deeper than the situation warranted. She wasn't just talking about the lawsuit. She was talking about the walls he'd built, the isolation he'd chosen, the decade he'd spent convinced that self-sufficiency was the same thing as strength. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll go to Helena." The next 3 weeks were a flurry of preparation. Eliza compiled every piece of evidence, cross-referenced every invoice, and built a case so airtight even Caleb was impressed. She worked with a focused intensity that reminded him she'd survived things that would have broken weaker people. They took the train to Helena on a Monday morning, the landscape rushing past in browns and whites. It was the first time they'd spent extended time together outside the ranch, and Caleb found himself hyper-aware of her presence beside him, The way she watched the passing scenery with quiet wonder, the way she unconsciously touched her wrist when nervous, the way she fit into the seat beside him like she belonged there. "I've never been to Helena," she said as the city came into view. "Never been anywhere, really, except Bannock and Blackstone. It's just a city, bigger buildings, more people, same problems." "You don't like cities." "I don't like crowds. Too many people wanting too many things." He looked at her. "You nervous about tomorrow? About testifying? No. About being in a room with Sarah Porter and having to stay civil? Yes." Eliza's smile was thin. "I have thoughts about people who steal from others and then play victim. I'd pay good money to hear those thoughts." "No, you wouldn't. They're not fit for polite company." They checked into the hotel, separate rooms on separate floors, properly respectable, and met with Caleb's lawyer that evening. Arthur Crane was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who'd handled Caleb's business contracts for years. He reviewed Eliza's evidence with growing satisfaction. "This is excellent work, Mrs. Brennan. With documentation this thorough, Porter's case is going to fall apart under cross-examination." "Then why are we here?" Caleb asked. "Why not just submit this and be done with it?" "Because Porter's lawyer, James Whitfield, is known for theatrics. He'll try to paint you as a cruel employer who destroyed a helpless woman's reputation. He'll make it about your character, not her actions." Crane looked at Eliza. "Which is why your testimony is critical. You're independent, competent, and most importantly, you weren't working for Mr. Harlow when Porter was employed. Your analysis carries no bias." The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. Caleb barely slept, his mind churning through scenarios and outcomes. Around midnight, he gave up and went down to the hotel lobby, intending to walk off his restlessness. He found Eliza there already, sitting in a leather chair by the fire, fully dressed. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She looked up, unsurprised. "Kept thinking about tomorrow, about facing her." "You don't have to do this. I can fight my own battles." "I know you can." She gestured to the chair beside her. "But maybe the question isn't whether you can fight alone. Maybe it's whether you should have to." Caleb sat, staring into the flames. They were quiet for a while, the only sound the crackle of burning wood and the distant noise of the city outside. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza's voice was soft. "What did Lillian do to you?" He should have deflected, should have changed the subject, but something about the late hour and the firelight and the fact that Eliza had shared her own scars made him answer honestly. "She took $8,000 and my ability to trust anyone. I was 26, stupid enough to believe that love was real and women meant what they said." The words tasted bitter. "She told me her father had debts, that if we could just clear them, we could start our life together. I gave her every penny I had saved. She disappeared 3 days later. Found out months later she'd run the same con in 4 other towns. Did you ever find her?" "No, she's probably still out there somewhere, running the same game on some other fool." He looked at Eliza. "That's when I started burning rings, when I realized that everyone who looked at me saw money first and maybe, if I was lucky, me second. That's why you told me on the first day you weren't interested in marriage. You were testing me." "I was protecting myself." "From what?" "From me?" Eliza's voice held something he couldn't quite identify. "Caleb, I came to your mountain with nothing. I sold my shoes to eat. If I wanted to trap a rich man, I could have aimed a lot higher than asking for a bookkeeping job. I know that now. Do you?" She turned to face him fully. "Because sometimes I watch you watch me, and I can see you trying to figure out my angle, what I want, what I'm after. And the answer is so simple it scares you." "What's the answer?" "Safety. Honest work. A place where I'm valued for what I can do, not what I can endure." Her eyes held his. "And maybe, eventually, someone who sees me as a person instead of a problem to be solved or a prize to be won." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a wall beginning to crack. "I see you," he said quietly. "I have since the day you rode up that trail." "Then stop waiting for me to betray you." Eliza stood, moving toward the stairs. At the landing, she paused. "I'm not Lillian, Caleb. The sooner you believe that, the sooner we can both stop pretending tomorrow's hearing is just about Sarah Porter." She left him there by the fire, and Caleb sat for another hour, watching the flames and feeling the careful architecture of his isolation beginning to crumble. The courthouse was packed. Apparently word had spread that Caleb Harlow was being sued by a former employee, and the spectacle had drawn everyone from business rivals to curious socialites. Caleb sat at the plaintiff's table beside Arthur Crane, his face carefully neutral, while across the aisle, Sarah Porter dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She looked different than he remembered, more refined, her dress expensive, her hair elaborately styled. The struggling bookkeeper had been replaced by someone who clearly had money to spend. Interesting. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Thornton, called the court to order. Porter's lawyer stood, launching into an impassioned speech about the cruel and baseless accusations that had destroyed his client's good name. Sarah Porter dedicated 3 years of loyal service to Blackstone Ridge Ranch, Whitfield declared, his voice resonating through the courtroom. And how was she repaid? With slander, with threats, with a campaign of defamation that has left her unable to find work anywhere in this territory. Mr. Harlow wielded his considerable power like a weapon, destroying a woman's life over minor bookkeeping discrepancies that she had every intention of correcting. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Beside him, Arthur Crane remained calm, occasionally making notes. Then it was their turn. Crane called Eliza to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her spine straight and her head high, wearing a simple navy dress that made her look competent and unshakable. When she swore to tell the truth, her voice was steady. Mrs. Brennan, Crane began, you currently work as the bookkeeper for Blackstone Ridge Ranch. Is that correct? Yes. And were you employed there during the time Sarah Porter held that position? No, I was hired 6 months after Mrs. Porter's departure. Can you describe the state of the ranch's financial records when you began your employment? Eliza's testimony was devastating in its precision. She walked through each discrepancy, each fabricated invoice, each pattern of theft with the calm clarity of someone presenting mathematical proof. She had brought the ledgers, the invoices, the evidence, and she laid it all out so methodically that even Judge Thornton leaned forward with interest. And in your professional opinion, Crane asked, were these discrepancies the result of honest mistakes? No. Eliza's voice was firm. These were deliberate, systematic thefts designed to be just small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to be profitable over time. It's a common fraud pattern. Whitfield objected, arguing that Eliza wasn't qualified to determine intent. But Judge Thornton overruled him, noting that expertise in bookkeeping included recognizing fraud patterns. When Whitfield cross-examined her, he tried to paint Eliza as biased, as someone with a personal stake in defending her employer. He implied she might have fabricated evidence to secure her own position. Mrs. Brennan, he said with false sympathy, isn't it true that you arrived at Blackstone Ridge in desperate circumstances? That you needed this job so badly you would say anything to keep it? Eliza didn't flinch. I arrived in desperate circumstances because my husband died and left me with nothing. I needed the job because I needed to eat. But I'm good at what I do, Mr. Whitfield, which means I don't have to lie to keep my position. The numbers speak for themselves. But aren't you perhaps grateful to Mr. Harlow? Grateful enough to bend the truth? I'm grateful to Mr. Harlow for giving me honest work at fair wages. But my testimony isn't about gratitude. It's about mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care about feelings. The gallery murmured appreciatively. Even Judge Thornton's lips twitched. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, Sarah Porter's composure had cracked. Whitfield was visibly frustrated, and Judge Thornton was reviewing the evidence with an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind. This court will recess until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, she announced, at which time I will deliver my ruling. That evening, Caleb and Eliza ate dinner at a quiet restaurant near the hotel. They were both exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. You were incredible today, Caleb said. The way you handled Whitfield's cross-examination, he underestimated me because I'm a woman and I was poor. People do that. Eliza cut into her steak with more force than necessary. They think desperation makes you stupid or dishonest. They can't imagine that maybe it just makes you determined. Porter looked shaken by the end. Porter looked guilty, which she is. Eliza set down her knife. But that lawyer of hers is going to keep pushing. Men like Whitfield don't give up easily. She was right. The next morning, Whitfield made a last-ditch effort, calling character witnesses who testified to Sarah Porter's kindness and dedication. But it was too little against the mountain of evidence. Judge Thornton's ruling was swift and brutal. Having reviewed the evidence presented, she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's tension, I find that Mr. Harlow's accusations against Sarah Porter were not only justified, but substantially understated. The documentation shows clear, deliberate fraud over a period of 3 years. Mrs. Porter's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, she is ordered to repay the full amount embezzled plus court costs. If payment is not rendered within 60 days, criminal charges will be filed. Sarah Porter went white. Her lawyer started to object, but Judge Thornton silenced him with a look. Mr. Whitfield, your client committed fraud and then attempted to use this court to compound that theft. She's lucky I'm not holding her in contempt. This hearing is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Caleb stood on the steps breathing in cold November air that tasted like vindication. Eliza stood beside him, and when their eyes met, something passed between them, relief, triumph, and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. Thank you, he said. For what? For standing with me, for seeing the truth and speaking it even when it was hard. Eliza smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. That's what partners do, Caleb. They stand together. Partners. The word hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple syllables suggested. And for the first time since Lillian Monroe had walked out of his life, Caleb Harlow thought maybe, just maybe, he could learn to trust again. They took the evening train back to Blackstone, the rhythm of the rails underneath them, a steady counterpoint to the silence between them. Something had shifted in Helena, something neither of them wanted to examine too closely in the harsh light of acknowledgement. So they sat side by side, watching Montana roll past the windows, and pretended the word partners hadn't changed everything. The ranch welcomed them back with familiar sounds, cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the barn door in the wind, Marcus's gruff voice directing the evening chores. It should have felt the same as it had 3 days ago. Instead, it felt different in ways Caleb couldn't quite name. Mail came while you were gone, Marcus said, handing Caleb a stack of envelopes. Most of it's the usual, supply invoices, cattle auction notices, but this one, he pulled out a cream-colored envelope with elegant script. This one's got a Helena postmark and perfume on it. Caleb took the envelope, frowning. The handwriting was unfamiliar, looping and feminine. He opened it, standing right there in the barn, Eliza looking over his shoulder. The letter inside was brief. Dear Mr. Harlow, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to request a meeting at your earliest convenience. There are matters concerning our past that I believe deserve discussion, and if you're willing, resolution. I will be in Blackstone at the Grand Hotel beginning December 1st. I remain, with sincere regards, Lillian Monroe. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Caleb read the letter twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Caleb? Eliza's voice came from very far away. What is it? He handed her the letter without speaking, watched her face as she read it, saw her expression shift from curiosity to understanding to something that looked like concern. This is the woman from before, she said quietly. The one who stole from you. Yes. And she's coming here. Apparently, Marcus had moved closer, reading over Eliza's shoulder. He let out a low whistle. That takes some nerve. Woman steals $8,000 and then has the gall to request a meeting like she's some kind of business associate. What does she want? Eliza's question was directed at Caleb, but he had no answer. I don't know. Money, probably, or to run some new con. He took the letter back, crumpling it in his fist. Doesn't matter. I won't see her. You sure about that? Marcus's tone was careful. Might be worth hearing what she has to say. Know thy enemy and all that. I know my enemy just fine. She taught me everything I need to know about trust and betrayal 10 years ago. Caleb shoved the crumpled letter into his pocket. I'm going to check on the North Herd. Eliza, can you review those supply invoices? Make sure we're not getting cheated again. He walked out before either of them could respond, needing space and cold air and distance from the words on that perfumed paper. But distance didn't help. For the next week, as November crawled toward December, the letter haunted him. He found himself wondering what Lillian looked like now, whether 10 years had changed her, whether she ever thought about what she'd done. He wondered what she could possibly want from him after all this time. And he hated that he wondered. Eliza noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You're distracted," she said one morning, finding him in the study staring at account books without seeing them. "You've been reading the same page for 20 minutes. Just thinking." About her. It wasn't a question. Caleb looked up, meeting those creekwater eyes that saw too much. "I don't want to talk about it." "I know you don't, but maybe you should anyway." Eliza sat down across from him, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Because whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, it's eating you alive." "What do you want me to say? That I'm curious? That part of me wants to know why she's coming back?" He stood, pacing to the window. "I spent 10 years building walls to keep people like her out. And now she shows up with a letter, and suddenly those walls feel like paper." "That's because walls aren't the same thing as healing. You never dealt with what she did to you. You just buried it under anger and isolation. And what would you have me do? Sit down for tea with the woman who destroyed my ability to trust anyone?" "I'd have you decide what you actually want." Eliza's voice was gentle but firm. "Do you want closure? Do you want answers? Do you want to tell her to her face what she took from you? Because those are all valid things, but hiding from her isn't going to make her go away. It's just going to make you wonder for the rest of your life what she wanted." Caleb pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, soft flakes drifting down from a gray sky. "What if she wants forgiveness?" "Then you decide if she deserves it." "What if she wants money?" "Then you tell her no." "What if—" He stopped, the real question catching in his throat. "What if she wants you back?" Eliza finished quietly. He turned to look at her. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read, something between understanding and hurt. "That's not going to happen," he said, "but it scares you that she might try." "It scares me that I don't know if I'm strong enough to say no." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "She broke something in me, Eliza, and I don't know if it ever healed right." Eliza stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. She was close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, close enough to see the flecks of green in her blue eyes. "Then maybe it's time to find out," she said. "Meet with her, hear what she has to say, and then make a choice based on who you are now, not who you were 10 years ago. And if I make the wrong choice, then you'll know you're human, which, despite your best efforts, you still are." December 1st arrived cold and bright. Caleb rode into Blackstone alone, despite Marcus's offer to accompany him. This was something he needed to face himself, whatever it turned out to be. The Grand Hotel was the finest establishment in town, which wasn't saying much. It had 20 rooms, a small restaurant, and aspirations of elegance it couldn't quite achieve. Caleb walked through the lobby, his boots loud on the wooden floor, and asked the clerk for Lillian Monroe's room number. "Room 12, sir, second floor, end of the hall." The clerk was young, probably hadn't been born when Lillian left. Had no idea he was directing Caleb toward a ghost. Caleb climbed the stairs slowly, his heart doing things it had no business doing. He told himself it was just adrenaline, just the natural anxiety of confronting old wounds, but part of him knew it was more complicated than that. He knocked on the door of room 12. "Come in." The voice was the same, soft, melodic, the kind of voice that had once convinced him love was real. Caleb opened the door. Lillian Monroe sat by the window in a chair upholstered in faded velvet, backlit by winter sun that turned her blonde hair into a halo. She was beautiful. More beautiful than he remembered, if that was possible. Older, yes, with fine lines around her eyes and mouth, but age had refined her features into something almost ethereal. She stood when she saw him, her hands clasped in front of her. "Caleb, thank you for coming." He closed the door, leaning against it. Didn't trust himself to move closer. "Your letter said you wanted to talk." "Yes, please sit." She gestured to the other chair. "I'll stand." A flicker of something, disappointment, hurt, crossed her face, but she nodded. "I suppose I deserve that." "You deserve a lot worse than that." "You're right. You're absolutely right."
She sat back down, smoothing her skirt with nervous fingers. I know you have no reason to listen to me, no reason to believe anything I say, but I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to explain. Explain what? How you stole $8,000? How you lied about your father's debts? How you disappeared without a word? Caleb's voice was hard as iron. I don't need explanations, Lillian. I figured it all out years ago. You figured out what I did, not why I did it. Does the why matter? It matters to me. She looked up at him, her eyes, still that impossible shade of violet blue, shining with what might have been tears. I was 23 years old and terrified. My father did have debts, Caleb. Gambling debts to men who were threatening to kill him if he didn't pay. I took your money because I was desperate and stupid and I thought I could fix everything. And did you? Fix everything? No. My father took the money and gambled it away in less than a month. Then he died anyway, drank himself to death in a boarding house in Sacramento. I spent the next 10 years trying to survive, moving from town to town, doing work I'm not proud of. Her voice cracked. I've made so many mistakes, Caleb, so many terrible choices. But taking your money, hurting you, that's the one I can't forgive myself for. Caleb listened, watching her face, trying to separate truth from performance. She was good. He had to give her that. The tears looked real. The regret sounded genuine, but he'd seen this show before. Why are you here? He asked. To apologize, to try to make amends. She reached for a leather case on the table beside her, opening it to reveal stacks of bills. I have $8,000. It took me years to save it, but I wanted to pay you back. Every penny, with interest if you'll accept it. Caleb stared at the money. It was real. He could tell from here. Crisp bills in neat stacks, probably representing years of work. Part of him, the part that had spent a decade angry, wanted to take it and walk out without another word. But another part, a part that sounded disturbingly like Eliza, whispered that this was too easy, too neat. Where did you get that money? He asked. I've been working. Honest work, I swear. I manage a boarding house in Helena. The owner passed away last year and left it to me in his will. I sold it, and this is my share. She closed the case. I know it doesn't erase what I did, but I wanted you to know that I've changed, that I'm not the scared, desperate girl who ran away. Why now? Why after 10 years? Lillian looked out the window, her profile delicate against the light. Because I'm tired of running. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of being the person who hurt people and never made it right. I want to start over somewhere. Maybe even here, if you'd let me. And there it was. The real reason. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. You want to stay in Blackstone. I want a chance to prove I've changed, to show you that I'm not your enemy anymore. She turned back to him, and now the tears were definitely real, spilling down her cheeks. I know it's too much to ask. I know I have no right. But Caleb, you were the only person who ever believed in me. The only one who saw something good. And I destroyed that. I've regretted it every single day. She was standing now, moving toward him, and every instinct Caleb had was screaming at him to step back, to leave, to slam the door on this entire conversation. But he stood frozen as she reached out and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she whispered. I'm just asking for a chance to earn it. Caleb looked down at her hand, then at her face. This close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the silver threading through her blonde hair. She looked tired, worn down, real. But real didn't mean trustworthy. I need to think about this, he said, stepping back so her hand fell away. Disappointment flashed across her face, but she nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here for at least a week. He left without taking the money, without making promises, without giving her anything except the possibility that he might not immediately throw her out of town. It felt like more than she deserved. It also felt like a mistake. The ride back to the ranch was cold and confused. Caleb's thoughts chased each other in circles, unable to settle on anything solid. He'd gone into that hotel room expecting to feel anger, vindication, maybe even satisfaction at seeing Lillian humbled. Instead, he felt nothing, or maybe everything. He couldn't tell anymore. Eliza was waiting on the porch when he rode up,
wrapped in a thick shawl against the December chill. She didn't ask how it went, just handed him a cup of coffee and sat down in the chair beside his. They drank in silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. Finally, Caleb spoke. She wants to pay me back. $8,000, right there in cash. That's good, isn't it? She also wants to stay in Blackstone, start over here. Eliza's cup paused halfway to her lips. I see. She says she's changed, that she spent 10 years regretting what she did. He turned to look at Eliza. You think people can change? I think people can learn. Whether that's the same thing, I don't know. Her voice was careful, neutral. What do you think? I think she's either telling the truth or she's running the longest con I've ever seen. Which feels more likely? Caleb considered. 10 years ago, I would have said she was telling the truth without hesitation. Now, after everything, I don't trust my own judgment anymore. Maybe that's the real problem. Eliza set down her cup. You're so afraid of being fooled again that you can't see clearly. You're looking for betrayal even in genuine gestures because that feels safer than believing someone might actually want to make amends. You sound like you're defending her. I'm not defending anyone. I'm just saying that fear is a terrible compass. She pulled her shawl tighter. But here's what I know. If you let her back into your life because you're afraid of seeming cruel, you're making a mistake. And if you refuse to even consider her apology because you're afraid of being hurt, you're making a different mistake. Either way, fear is making the choice, not you. Then what should I do? Figure out what you actually want, not what you should want, not what's safest, what's true. She went inside, leaving him alone with the darkness and his thoughts. Over the next 3 days, Caleb tried to figure out what was true. He went about his work, checking cattle, reviewing accounts, managing the ranch, but his mind was elsewhere. Lillian's face kept appearing in his thoughts, overlaid with memories of who she'd been and questions about who she was now. Marcus noticed. You're going to drive yourself crazy, the foreman said, finding Caleb staring at a fence post he was supposed to be repairing. Just make a decision. See her again or don't. But stop torturing yourself. It's not that simple. It never is with you. Marcus hammered a nail with more force than necessary. But let me ask you something. If Lillian had never shown up, if it was just you and Eliza here on this ranch, would you be happy? The question caught Caleb off guard. What does Eliza have to do with this? Everything, I'd wager. But you're too stubborn to see it. Marcus straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. You got a good woman right here who sees you for who you are and doesn't want anything except honesty. And you're spinning in circles over a ghost from 10 years ago who brought nothing but pain. Seems like a pretty clear choice to me. Eliza's my bookkeeper. Eliza's your partner, whether you've admitted it yet or not. Marcus picked up his tools. And if you can't see the difference between a woman who asks for nothing and a woman who took everything, then you're even more lost than I thought. That night, unable to sleep, Caleb found himself in his father's old study, the room he rarely entered anymore. It still smelled like pipe tobacco and leather. Still felt like the old man was about to walk through the door and ask about the day's work. On impulse, Caleb opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside was his mother's wooden box, the one with the silver locket. But there was something else too, a leather journal he'd forgotten about. His father's journal, kept sporadically over the years. Caleb opened it, flipping through pages of notes about cattle prices and weather patterns and ranch decisions. Then, near the back, he found an entry dated 3 months before his father died. Caleb asked me today if I ever regretted not remarrying after his mother passed. I told him no, but that's not entirely true. I regretted the loneliness sometimes, the empty house, the silence, but I never regretted refusing to settle for someone who wasn't her. Better to be alone with good memories than together with the wrong person. I worry about the boy. He's building walls I recognize, the same ones I built after she died, but he's young enough that he might still tear them down if he finds the right reason. I hope he does. I hope he learns what I never could, that the risk of being hurt is sometimes worth taking if it means not dying alone inside your own armor. Caleb read the passage 3 times. His father had written this 7 years ago, 3 years before Lillian, before the walls became permanent. It was like the old man had seen the future and left a message. Or maybe he just understood his son better than Caleb understood himself. The next morning, Caleb rode back into town. But he didn't go to the Grand Hotel. He went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wade Brenner was a friend of sorts, one of the few people in town Caleb trusted. He looked up from his paperwork when Caleb entered, raising an eyebrow. "Caleb, what brings you in?" "I need information on someone. Lillian Monroe. She's staying at the Grand Hotel." "The blonde woman?" "Yeah, I noticed her. Hard not to." Wade leaned back in his chair. "What kind of information?" "Anything you can find. Where she's been, what she's been doing, if there are any warrants or complaints." Caleb leaned against the desk. "She says she's changed. I want to know if that's true." Wade studied him for a long moment. "This the woman from before? The one who took your money?" "Yes." "And she's back because she says to make amends, to pay me back." Caleb pulled out the crumpled letter, smoothing it on Wade's desk. "But I need to know if she's running from something or toward something. There's a difference." "Give me 2 days. I'll send telegrams to Helena. Check with some contacts." Wade picked up the letter, scanning it. "You know, Caleb, sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Woman who stole from you once is probably going to steal from you again." "That's what I thought too, but what if I'm wrong?" "Then you're wrong. But being cautious isn't the same thing as being paranoid." Wade handed the letter back. 2 days. I'll get you answers." Caleb left the sheriff's office feeling both better and worse. Better because he was taking action instead of just spinning in circles. Worse because he realized what he was really doing, looking for permission to trust Lillian again, or looking for proof that he shouldn't. Either way, he was letting her dictate his peace of mind. When he got back to the ranch, he found Eliza in the kitchen making bread, her hands covered in flour. She looked up when he entered, reading something in his face. "You went to see her again?" "I went to the sheriff, asked him to check into her story." He pulled off his coat, hanging it by the door. "I need to know if she's telling the truth. And if she is? If everything checks out, and she's exactly who she says she is?" Eliza's hand stilled in the dough. "What then?" "I don't know." "Caleb." She turned to face him fully, and there was something new in her expression, something harder than he'd seen before. "I told you to figure out what you want. Have you?" "I want to not be taken advantage of again." "That's what you don't want. What do you want?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was lodged somewhere in his chest, tangled up with fear and old wounds and the memory of his father's words about dying alone inside his own armor. "I want to feel safe," he said finally. "I want to trust someone without waiting for the betrayal." "Then trust yourself." Eliza's voice was quiet but intense. "Trust your instincts. Trust what you see instead of what you're afraid of seeing. Because right now, you're so busy looking backward at who hurt you that you can't see what's right in front of you. And what's right in front of me." She looked at him for a long moment, flour on her cheek and something like heartbreak in her eyes. Then she turned back to her bread. "That's what you need to figure out." 2 days later, Sheriff Wade found Caleb at the feed store and pulled him aside. "Got your information," he said, his voice low. "And it's not good." They walked to the alley beside the building, away from curious ears. Wade pulled out a telegram, handing it to Caleb. "Lillian Monroe has been running cons across 4 states for the past decade. Same pattern every time. Shows up in a town, finds a wealthy mark, gets money however she can, disappears. Helena Sheriff says she's wanted for fraud in 3 counties. Only reason there's no warrant yet is because the victims were too embarrassed to press charges." Caleb read the telegram, his hand steady, despite the rage building in his chest. "The boarding house she said she inherited? Stolen from the actual heir. She forged documents, sold the property before anyone noticed, disappeared with the money." Wade's face was grim. "She's not here to make amends, Caleb. She's running from fraud charges. Probably figures a small town like Blackstone is a good place to hide while things cool down. Or she's here to run the same con on me again," Caleb finished. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "She shows up with $8,000, makes a show of paying me back, gains my trust. Then what? Steals more? Uses me as cover while the law looks for her elsewhere?" "That'd be my guess." Wade took the telegram back. Want me to arrest her? Caleb thought about it. Thought about watching Lillian in handcuffs, finally facing consequences for all the people she'd hurt. It should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt sad. No, he said. I'll handle it. Caleb, I said I'll handle it. His voice had gone cold, the tone that made people step back. But thank you for the information. He walked away before Wade could argue, his mind already racing ahead to what came next. He'd been a fool, not for wondering if Lillian had changed, but for needing external proof when his gut had already told him the truth. Eliza had been right. He'd been so afraid of being fooled that he couldn't see he was already being manipulated. But not anymore. He rode straight to the Grand Hotel, his jaw set and his purpose clear. This time, when he knocked on room 12, he didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed the door open. Lillian jumped up from her chair, hand to her heart. Caleb, you startled me. Good. He closed the door behind him. We need to talk. Of course, please sit. I know about Helena, about the boarding house you stole, about the fraud charges in 3 counties. He watched her face carefully, saw the moment the mask slipped. You're not here to make amends. You're here to hide. For a long moment, Lillian said nothing. Then slowly she sat back down. The tears were gone. The vulnerability had vanished. What was left was something harder, more calculating. Who told you? Her voice was different now, sharper, less melodic. Does it matter? I suppose not. She looked at him with something like resignation. So what now? You turn me in? Have me arrested? I should. You've hurt a lot of people. Including you. Twice now, if we're counting. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what's funny? Part of what I told you was true. I did spend 10 years regretting what I did to you, not because I cared about you, I barely knew you, but because you were the easiest mark I ever had, and I've never found another one like you. Young, rich, lonely, desperate to believe someone loved you. Perfect. The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But Caleb had spent 10 years building armor against exactly this kind of pain. You're right, he said quietly. I was all those things, but I'm not anymore. No, you're not. You're harder now, colder. I saw it the first time you walked through that door. Lillian stood, smoothing her dress. But you're still lonely, Caleb, still desperate for connection. That's why you came back. That's why you wanted to believe I'd changed. Because believing that would mean maybe you could change too. Maybe you could stop being the bitter, isolated man everyone's afraid of. You don't know anything about me. I know you're going to die alone in that big house you built, surrounded by walls you refuse to tear down. She picked up the leather case with the money, holding it out to him. Here, take it. It's yours anyway. I stole it from the Helena sale. Consider it payment for all the trouble I caused. Caleb didn't take the case. Get out of Blackstone, today. If you're still here tomorrow, I will have you arrested. Fair enough? She set the case on the table. For what it's worth, I meant what I said about regretting you. Not because you deserved better, though you did, but because you could have been someone worth knowing if you hadn't let what I did destroy you. I didn't let what you did destroy me. I let it teach me. And what did it teach you? To trust no one? To push away anyone who gets close? To burn rings instead of giving them to someone who might actually love you? Lillian moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. I took your money, Caleb, but you let me take everything else. That's on you. She left, and the door clicked shut behind her with a finality that echoed in the silence. Caleb stood in the empty room, staring at the leather case full of money that meant nothing. She was wrong. She had to be wrong. He wasn't the problem. She was. She and all the other people who'd tried to use him. But doubt crept in anyway, insidious and unwelcome, because part of what Lillian had said was true. He was lonely. He had built walls, and he was so busy protecting himself from being hurt that he'd forgotten what it felt like to actually live. He thought about his father's journal, about dying alone inside your own armor. He thought about Eliza, who'd stood beside him in Helena, who'd helped him fight his battles, who asked for nothing except honesty and gave everything she had in return. He thought about the word partners and how it had sounded when she said it.
And for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Harlow allowed himself to wonder if maybe the scariest thing wasn't being betrayed again. Maybe it was realizing he'd already found something real and being too afraid to reach for it. He picked up the leather case and walked out of room 12 without looking back.
The ride back to the ranch felt longer than it should have. Caleb kept Lillian's words circling in his head like vultures, picking at wounds he'd thought were sealed. The leather case sat in his saddlebag, $8,000 that should have felt like vindication, but instead felt like evidence of his own blindness. He'd almost believed her, almost let her back in. The realization sat in his stomach like spoiled food. Judge picked his way through the snow-covered trail while Caleb wrestled with thoughts he'd been avoiding for months. Lillian had been wrong about most things, but she'd been right about one. He was still lonely, still building walls, still so afraid of being hurt that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. Eliza was what was right in front of him. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it settled into his chest with the weight of something true. By the time he reached the ranch, dusk was falling and the windows of the house glowed warm against the December cold. Smoke rose from the chimney in a straight line toward the darkening sky. It looked like home in a way it hadn't in years, and Caleb knew exactly why. Marcus met him at the barn, taking Judge's reins. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," Caleb dismounted, pulling the leather case from his saddlebag. Lillian was running a con. Wade found fraud charges in 3 counties. "Figured as much. Woman like that doesn't change her spots." Marcus started unsaddling the horse. "You send her packing?" "Told her to be gone by tomorrow or I'd have her arrested." "Good. Should have done it 10 years ago." The foreman paused, giving Caleb a long look. "But that's not what's eating at you, is it?" "She said something about me dying alone because I'm too afraid to let anyone in." "Woman's a liar and a thief."
"Why would you listen to anything she says?" "Because liars sometimes tell uncomfortable truths." Caleb leaned against the barn wall, suddenly exhausted. "What if she's right, Marcus? What if I've been so busy protecting myself that I've missed what actually matters?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, brushing down Judge with steady strokes. "You asking about Eliza?" "Yes." "Then stop asking and go talk to her." The foreman didn't look up from his work. "Woman's been in the house all day, barely touching her food, jumping every time the door opens. She knows something's wrong and she thinks it's her fault somehow. So either fix it or let her go find someone who will." The words hit harder than a physical blow. Caleb had been so consumed with his own drama, his own past, that he hadn't thought about how this affected Eliza, how watching him chase after a ghost might make her feel. He found her in the study, surrounded by ledgers as always, but she wasn't working. She was staring out the window at the darkness, her face reflected in the glass, looking lost and small. "Eliza." She turned and he saw she'd been crying. The evidence was in her red-rimmed eyes, the way she quickly wiped at her cheeks. "You're back." "I'm back." He set the leather case on the desk. "Lillian's gone, or she will be by tomorrow." "Oh." Her voice was flat, carefully neutral. "Did you get your closure?" "I got the truth. She was running from fraud charges. The whole apology, the money, all of it was just another con." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I should have seen it coming." Caleb moved closer, but Eliza turned back to the window, putting distance between them. "She said something, though, something I can't stop thinking about." "What's that?" "That I'm going to die alone because I'm too afraid to let anyone in." He watched her reflection in the glass, saw her shoulders tense. "She said I let what she did destroy me." "Did you?" The question was quiet, but it demanded honesty. Caleb thought about the 47 proposals he'd rejected, the rings he'd burned, the decade he'd spent convinced that isolation was the same thing as safety. "Yes," he said. "I let her teach me that everyone wants something from me, that trust is just another word for stupidity, that love is a transaction, and I'm nothing but a bank account with a heartbeat." "And now?" Eliza's voice was barely above a whisper. "Now I'm realizing I might have been wrong about all of it." He took another step closer. "Because you've been here for months, Eliza. You've seen my books, my bank accounts, my assets. You know exactly what I'm worth down to the last dollar. And in all that time, you've never once asked me for anything except honest work and fair wages. That's my job. It's more than that, and we both know it. Caleb was close enough now to see her reflection clearly, see the tears tracking down her cheeks. You stood beside me in Helena. You uncovered fraud you had no stake in. You've made this ranch run better than it has in years. You've made this house feel less empty. You've made me feel less empty. Caleb, don't. Her voice broke. Don't say things you don't mean just because you're emotional about Lillian. This has nothing to do with Lillian. Or maybe it has everything to do with her. I don't know anymore. He reached out, gently turning her to face him. But I know that when I was in that hotel room listening to her lies, all I could think about was getting back here, getting back to you. Because somewhere between the day you rode up that mountain with nothing but truth and right now, you became the thing I can't afford to lose. You don't lose employees, Caleb. You just hire new ones. You're not an employee. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs wiping away her tears. You haven't been for a long time. You're my partner, my friend, the person who sees me clearly and doesn't flinch. And I've been so afraid of admitting that because admitting it means risking everything all over again. Eliza closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling out. You compared me to her. When I warned you about Lillian, when I told you some people come back to hide, not heal, you looked at me like I was being paranoid, like I was the problem. The accusation landed like a knife between his ribs because it was true. He had doubted her, had let old wounds and old fears make him question the one person who'd proven herself trustworthy over and over again. You're right, I did, and I was wrong. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. I was so scared of being fooled again that I couldn't see you were trying to protect me. I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix broken trust. I know, but maybe time does, maybe proving myself does. He let his hands fall away, giving her space. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've been a fool. About Lillian, about trust, about you. But I'm asking anyway. Let me prove I can do better. Let me show you that I see you, really see you, not as a replacement for anything, but as the person who made me want to tear down these walls I've been hiding behind. Eliza opened her eyes, looking at him with an expression caught between hope and hurt. What are you saying, Caleb? I'm saying I'm done burning rings, done pushing away anyone who gets close, done letting fear make my choices. He took a breath, steadying himself. I'm saying I want you to stay, not as my bookkeeper, as my partner in every sense of the word. And if you'll give me time to prove I'm worthy of that, I'll spend every day showing you that you made the right choice. For a long moment, Eliza said nothing, just studied his face like she was reading a ledger, looking for discrepancies, checking the math of his sincerity. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. I don't need grand gestures, she said quietly. I need consistency. I need to know that when things get hard, you won't doubt me again. That when your past comes calling, you'll remember who stood beside you in the present. I will. I swear I will. And I need you to understand that I'm not Lillian. I'm not here to steal from you or use you or run away when things get complicated. I'm here because this is where I choose to be. But choice goes both ways, Caleb. You have to choose me, too. Not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. I choose you. The words came out fierce, certain. I choose you, Eliza Brennan. I choose your honesty and your strength and the way you see through my walls to whatever's underneath. I choose the way you make this house feel like home instead of a museum to my own isolation. I choose all of it. Eliza's hand tightened on his. Then I'll stay. But we do this right. No rushing. No pretending we don't both have scars that need healing. We build something real, slowly, together. Together, Caleb agreed, and the word felt like a promise. They stood there in the study, hands joined while outside the December wind rattled the windows, and inside something fragile and new took its first breath. The next morning, Sheriff Wade sent word that Lillian Monroe had left town on the early stage to Butte. Caleb felt nothing, no triumph, no relief, no lingering anger, just a sense of a chapter closing that should have ended years ago. He gave the $8,000 to Wade with instructions to track down Lillian's victims and distribute the money among them. It seemed fitting somehow, using her stolen money to repair some of the damage she'd done. You sure about this? Wade asked, hefting the leather case. This is your money. It stopped being my money the day she stole it. Now it's just evidence of who I used to be. Caleb pulled on his gloves, preparing to head back to the ranch. I'd rather it go to people who need it than sit in my safe reminding me of my own stupidity. You're a better man than most, Harlow. I'm trying to be. Caleb tipped his hat and left, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. When he got back to the ranch, he found Eliza in the barn showing Tommy Reed how to properly balance the feed inventory sheets. The young cowboy was nodding along, clearly more interested in impressing her than in understanding the accounting. And if the numbers don't match the actual feed levels, Eliza was saying, we either have theft or waste. Either way, we need to... Oh, hello, Caleb. She looked up as he approached, and something in her expression had softened since last night. Not quite trust yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Can I borrow you for a minute? He asked. Of course. Tommy, practice those calculations. I'll check your work after lunch. They walked out of the barn together, falling into step naturally. The December sun was bright on the snow, making everything sparkle like diamond dust. Lillian's gone, Caleb said. Left town this morning. How do you feel about that? Relieved, ready to move forward. He glanced at her. I gave the money to Wade, asked him to track down her other victims and split it among them. Eliza stopped walking, turning to face him with surprise. That's good, Caleb. Really good. Felt right, like closing the door instead of just locking it. He hesitated, then added, I want to show you something. In the house. They went inside, Caleb leading her to his father's old study. He pulled out the wooden box from the desk drawer, opening it to show her the silver locket. This was my mother's. My father gave it to me after she died. He opened the locket, showing her the photograph. They loved each other, really loved each other. I saw it every day growing up. Eliza looked at the photograph, then at him. Why are you showing me this? Because I found my father's journal a few days ago. He wrote about regretting his loneliness, but never regretting refusing to settle. He said it was better to be alone with good memories than together with the wrong person. Caleb closed the locket carefully. But he also said he hoped I'd learn what he never could, that the risk of being hurt is worth taking if it means not dying alone inside your own armor. Wise man. He was, and I think he'd like you. Caleb put the locket back in the box. You remind me of her, actually. My mother. Not in looks, but in the way you move through the world. Honest, direct, not afraid to call out nonsense when you see it. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. He turned to face her fully. I know we said slow, and I meant it, but I also want you to know that I'm committed to this, to us, to building something real. What does that look like to you? Something real? Caleb thought about it. It looks like mornings drinking coffee on the porch, like working side by side and trusting each other's judgment, like having someone to talk to at the end of a long day who actually listens, like not being alone in this big house that was built for a family. It looks like partnership, Eliza said softly. Yes, exactly that. She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. Then let's build it, one day at a time. Over the next weeks, they did exactly that. Caleb threw himself into proving he meant what he'd said, not with flowers or jewelry or grand romantic gestures, but with consistency, with small acts of consideration that showed he was paying attention. He noticed she liked her coffee with just a hint of sugar, so he started making it that way before she came downstairs. He noticed she got cold easily, so he made sure the fire in her room was stoked every evening. He noticed she sometimes rubbed her wrist when stressed, so he'd quietly put hot tea within her reach without making her ask. And Eliza, in turn, opened up in ways she hadn't before. She told him about her childhood in a mining camp, about a father who drank and a mother who died young. She told him about meeting her husband at 17, thinking marriage was escape only to find it was another kind of prison. He wasn't always cruel, she said one evening. They were in the kitchen, Caleb chopping vegetables while she rolled out pie dough. At first, he was just controlling. Little things. Telling me what to wear, who I could talk to. I thought it meant he cared. And then it escalated. Slowly. So slowly I didn't notice until I was trapped. Her hands worked the dough mechanically. The first time he hit me, he cried after, swore it would never happen again, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him. How long did it go on? 5 years.
5 years of walking on eggshells, making myself smaller, apologizing for things that weren't my fault. She paused, staring down at the dough. When he died in that mind collapse, I felt guilty for being relieved. What kind of person is relieved when their husband dies? The kind who survived something terrible. Caleb set down the knife, moving to stand beside her. You're not a bad person for being glad it's over, Eliza. You're a survivor. Sometimes I worry I'm broken, that what he did damaged something in me that can't be fixed. You're not broken. You're careful. There's a difference. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her wrist where the bruises had been. These scars don't make you broken. They make you strong, because you survived them, and you're still here, still fighting, still choosing to build a life instead of just endure one. Eliza looked up at him with tears in her eyes. How do you always know the right thing to say? I don't. Most of the time, I'm terrified I'm saying the wrong thing, but I'm trying to be honest and hoping that's enough. She set down the rolling pin and hugged him, quick and fierce, like she needed the contact but wasn't sure she was allowed to take it. Caleb held her carefully, aware that trust was built in moments like this, moments where nothing happened except two broken people choosing to believe they might heal each other. Christmas came cold and bright. The ranch hands had a tradition of gathering at the main house for dinner, and for the first time in years, Caleb looked forward to it instead of dreading it. Eliza spent 2 days cooking, refusing help but humming while she worked. And when the men arrived, they found a table loaded with roasted beef, potatoes, pies, and enough food to feed twice their number. Mrs. Brennan, you've outdone yourself, Marcus said, loading his plate. Haven't eaten this good since my mother was alive. It's nice to cook for people who appreciate it, Eliza replied, but she was smiling. Caleb watched from the head of the table as his men laughed and joked and complimented the food, watched Eliza move among them, refilling drinks and accepting compliments with grace. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't in his entire adult life. And he realized with startling clarity that this was what he'd been missing. Not romance, not even love necessarily, just connection. Just people who chose to be there because they wanted to, not because they had to. After dinner, when the men had gone back to the bunkhouse and the dishes were cleaned, Caleb and Eliza sat by the fire in the living room. It was the first time they'd been in this room together. Caleb usually avoided it because it was too big, too empty, too much of a reminder of the family his father had built, and he hadn't. Thank you for today, he said, for making this house feel like a home. It's a good house. It deserves to be lived in properly. Eliza was curled in one of the armchairs, stockinged feet tucked under her, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. Your father built something special here. I can feel it in the walls. He did, and then I let it die because I was too busy feeling sorry for myself. You were hurt. That's different than self-pity. Is it? Caleb stared into the fire. Sometimes I think I used Lillian as an excuse. Like if I kept blaming her for breaking me, I didn't have to take responsibility for staying broken. Maybe. But you're not broken now. No, I'm not. He looked at her, this woman who'd appeared on his mountain with nothing and given him everything that mattered. Because of you. Not because of me. Because you chose to heal. I just happened to be here when you decided to do it. Don't diminish your role in this. His voice was gentle but firm. You saved me, Eliza. Maybe not in some dramatic rescue way, but in all the small daily ways that actually matter. You reminded me what it feels like to trust someone, to be seen, to not be alone. Eliza's eyes glistened in the firelight. You saved me too, gave me work when I was desperate, a place to live when I had nowhere to go, respect when I'd forgotten what that felt like. That's just basic decency. Basic decency isn't as common as you think. She uncurled from the chair, moving to sit beside him on the sofa. Most men in your position would have taken advantage, would have made demands, would have treated me like I owed them something beyond my labor. The thought never crossed my mind. I know, that's why I'm here. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. That's why I trust you, Because in 4 months, you've never once made me feel unsafe. Never made me doubt my worth. Never confused kindness with weakness. They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, blanketing the ranch in white silence. "Caleb?" Eliza's voice was quiet. "Yes?" "What happens next? With us, I mean." It was a fair question. They'd been building something for months now, but neither of them had defined it. Caleb thought about his father's journal, about his mother's locket, about 47 rejected proposals and 1 burnt ring. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never done this before. The real thing, I mean. Everything before was either youthful stupidity or calculated self-protection. But this, what we have, this is different. This is real. It scares you, terrifies me. Because real means vulnerable, means trusting you with parts of myself I've kept locked away for a decade, means accepting that you might hurt me, even if you don't mean to, just by being human." "I'm going to hurt you," Eliza said quietly. "Not on purpose, but it'll happen, because that's what people do when they get close. We make mistakes, we say the wrong thing, we let each other down sometimes." "I know. And you're going to hurt me too. Probably already have in ways I haven't told you about yet." She squeezed his hand. "But the question isn't whether we'll hurt each other. It's whether we'll forgive each other when it happens, whether we'll choose to stay and work through it instead of running." "I'm done running," Caleb said. "I've been running for 10 years and all it got me was a cold house and burned rings. I want to stay. I want to build something that lasts." "With me?" "With you." He turned to face her fully. "If you'll have me, all of me, the bitter parts and the broken parts, and the parts that are still learning how to trust. I can't promise perfection, Eliza, but I can promise I'll try. Every day I'll try to be worthy of what you're offering." "And what am I offering?" "A future, a partnership, a chance to be something other than the man who burned rings." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her scarred wrist gently. "A chance to choose love instead of fear." Eliza's breath caught. Love? The word hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Caleb had said it without thinking, but now that it was out there, he couldn't take it back. Didn't want to take it back. "Yes," he said. "Love. Maybe I'm saying it too soon. Maybe I'm supposed to wait longer or be more careful. But I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of measuring my words and protecting myself and pretending I don't feel things I actually feel. So yes, love. I love you, Eliza Brennan. I love your honesty and your strength and the way you rode up my mountain asking for nothing but gave me everything. And if that scares you off, then I'm sorry, but I won't take it back." For a long moment, Eliza just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face, a real smile, the kind that lit up her whole face and made her eyes shine. "It doesn't scare me off," she said softly, "because I love you too. I've loved you since Helena, maybe longer. Since the day you trusted me enough to fight your battles beside you instead of for you. Since every morning you made my coffee exactly how I like it without making a production of it. Since you showed me that strength doesn't mean never being vulnerable, it means choosing to be vulnerable with the right person." "And I'm the right person?" "You're my person," she corrected. "The one I choose. The one I want to build something real with." Caleb pulled her close, and she came willingly, tucking her head against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat against his ribs, steady and sure. Proof that this was real. That she was real. That after 10 years of isolation and fear, he'd finally found something worth more than all his land and cattle combined. "We're going to be terrible at this sometimes," he murmured into her hair. "Probably. We're both stubborn and damaged and used to doing things alone. But we'll figure it out." "Yes, we will." She tilted her head up to look at him. "Together." And there in his father's living room, with snow falling outside and fire burning low, Caleb Harlow kissed Eliza Brennan for the first time. It was gentle and careful and full of promise, the kiss of two people who'd been broken before and knew how precious it was to be trusted with someone else's heart. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza was crying again, but this time they were happy tears. "I should probably move to a different room,"
she said, half laughing. The housekeeper's quarters seem inappropriate now. Move into the house. Properly, I mean. There are 6 bedrooms upstairs. Pick whichever one you want. Caleb brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Or don't. Whatever makes you comfortable. No pressure, no expectations. We do this at your pace. Our pace, Eliza corrected. We're partners, remember? That means equal say in how this goes. Our pace, Caleb agreed, and the word felt like coming home. The winter passed with a gentleness that surprised them both. Eliza moved into the upstairs bedroom that faced east, the one that caught the sunrise and looked out over the mountains. She kept the housekeeper's quarters as her office, claiming she needed a space that was just hers. And Caleb understood because he was learning that love didn't mean erasure. It meant making room. They fell into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. Morning coffee on the porch when the weather allowed, Eliza wrapped in blankets and Caleb in his heavy coat, watching the world wake up. Evenings in the study, working side by side on ranch business, their conversations drifting from cattle prices to childhood memories to dreams neither had spoken aloud before. Dinners at the big table that no longer felt too empty, even when it was just the two of them. The ranch hands noticed, of course. Marcus made a comment about Caleb smiling more, which earned him a glare but no real denial. Tommy Reed asked Eliza if she was planning to stay permanent-like, and blushed furiously when she said yes. The rest of the men simply adjusted, the way people do when something that should have been true all along finally becomes real. But not everyone in Blackstone was pleased with the arrangement. It started with whispers at the general store, then grew louder at the Sunday services Caleb didn't attend but heard about anyway. The widow Brennan living in sin with the richest man in 3 counties. Unmarried and unashamed, setting a bad example for decent women. The talk was vicious in the way small-town gossip always was. Equal parts scandal and envy. Eliza heard it too, though she pretended not to. Caleb saw it in the way her shoulders tensed when they rode into town together, the way she kept her eyes straight ahead when women whispered behind their hands. She never complained, never asked him to defend her, but he could see it wearing on her like water on stone. The confrontation came in late February when Reverend Thomas Whitmore cornered them outside the feed store. "Mr. Harlow," the Reverend said, his voice carrying across the street. "A word, if you please." Caleb felt Eliza stiffen beside him. Thomas Whitmore was in his 50s, a man who wielded moral authority like a weapon and had ambitions that extended beyond the pulpit. His daughter Caroline had been proposal number 47, the one whose ring Caleb had burned the night before Eliza arrived. "Reverend," Caleb said neutrally, "what can I do for you?" "It's what you can do for this community that concerns me." Whitmore's eyes flicked to Eliza with barely concealed disdain. "There's been talk about the living arrangements at your ranch, about Mrs. Brennan's position in your household. Mrs. Brennan is my business partner and bookkeeper. Her position is none of your concern. When it threatens the moral fabric of this town, it becomes everyone's concern." The Reverend's voice grew louder, drawing a crowd. People stopped on the boardwalk to listen, and Caleb saw the calculation in Whitmore's eyes. This wasn't about morality. This was about humiliation, about revenge for Caroline's rejection. "The decent women of Blackstone are troubled," Whitmore continued. "They see a woman of questionable background living openly with a man not her husband, and they worry about what message this sends to their daughters. They've asked me to intervene." "Have they?" Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. "And what exactly are you intervening to accomplish?" "A proper marriage, of course. If Mrs. Brennan is to remain in your household, propriety demands you mind your own business." Eliza's voice cut through the Reverend's bluster like a knife. She stepped forward, chin up, eyes blazing. "I'm a widow, Reverend, not a child who needs your guidance. My choices are my own." "Choices that affect us all, Mrs. Brennan. Surely you understand—" "I understand that you're using concern for morality to mask your daughter's wounded pride." Eliza's words were sharp enough to draw blood. "Your daughter wanted to marry Mr. Harlow for his money, not his character. He saw through it and said no. That's not a moral failing. That's good judgment." The crowd murmured. Whitmore's face went red. "How dare you? How dare I speak the truth?" Eliza didn't back down. "I've been listening to this town whisper about me for months, calling me names.
questioning my character, and I've held my tongue because I know how these things work. But I won't stand here and let you weaponize morality to pressure a man into doing what you want. This isn't about what I want. This is about what's right. No, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. This is about control, about you trying to force your vision of righteousness onto people who don't answer to you. But here's what you need to understand, Reverend. I don't care what this town thinks about my personal life. I don't care about gossip or propriety or your opinions about sin. Eliza stays in my house because she chooses to, and I choose to have her there. What we are to each other is between us, not you, not this town, us. Then you're both sinners who deserve careful. The single word from Caleb was enough to make Whitmore stop mid-sentence. You're about to say something you can't take back. Something that will make me question why this town tolerates a man who uses shame as a weapon against people who've done nothing wrong. The Reverend's mouth opened and closed. He looked around at the crowd, clearly expecting support, but found only uncomfortable faces. Because Caleb Harlow might be difficult and cold, but he was also the man who'd helped neighbors through the early snow, who'd given jobs when times were hard, who'd never once used his wealth to make anyone feel small. Whitmore couldn't claim the same. "This isn't over," the Reverend said finally, his voice tight with impotent rage. "Yes, it is." Caleb took Eliza's hand, threading their fingers together in full view of everyone watching. "You don't get to decide how we live our lives. Neither does anyone else in this town. If that makes us sinners in your eyes, so be it. We'll take our chances." He led Eliza to their wagon, helped her up, and drove away from a street full of stunned faces and scandalized whispers. They rode in silence for a mile before Eliza spoke. "You just made an enemy of the most influential man in Blackstone. I made an enemy of a bully who tried to shame you in public." Caleb's hands were tight on the reins. "I won't apologize for that. I'm not asking you to." She was quiet for a moment. "But he's right about one thing. People are talking, and it's only going to get worse." "Let them talk." "Caleb," she put her hand on his arm, "you have to live in this community. Do business with these people. You can't just ignore them. Watch me." But Eliza was right, and Caleb knew it. Over the next weeks, the whispers turned into something harder. Several business owners who'd always been friendly became distant. Women who'd once smiled at Eliza in town now crossed the street to avoid her. Tommy Reed came back from town one day with a black eye from defending her honor against 3 men who'd called her things that made Caleb want to burn Blackstone to the ground. "It's getting worse," Marcus said bluntly. They were in the barn, and the foreman's face was grim. "Whitmore's been preaching against sin and loose women every Sunday. He never mentions Eliza by name, but everyone knows who he means. He's turning this into a crusade." "Then he's a fool." "Maybe. But he's a fool with influence." Marcus hesitated. "The men are loyal to you, boss. But their wives go to that church. Their families listen to Whitmore. It's putting them in a difficult position." Caleb wanted to rage against the unfairness of it, wanted to point out that he and Eliza had done nothing wrong except choose each other. But he understood the reality. In places like Blackstone, appearance mattered as much as truth, maybe more. That night, he found Eliza in her room, packing. "What are you doing?" She didn't turn around. "What I should have done weeks ago. Leaving before this gets any worse." "No." Caleb crossed the room, taking the dress from her hands. "You're not leaving." "I have to. This town will never accept us like this. And I won't let you lose everything you've built because of me." "You're not because of anything. You're the reason." He made her look at him. "Eliza, I don't care about Whitmore or his crusade or what this town thinks. I care about you, about us, about building the life we said we wanted." "At what cost?" Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "You could lose business partners, friendships, the respect of this community, all because you're too stubborn to do the one thing that would make this go away." "Marry you mean?" The words hung between them. Eliza's breath caught. "That's not... I wasn't..." She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't want you to marry me because a reverend with a grudge is making your life difficult. I don't want to be the solution to a problem, Caleb. I want to be chosen." "You are chosen. I choose you every day." Then choose me for the right reasons, not because of pressure or scandal or small-town politics. Choose me because you can't imagine a future without me in it. I can't, Caleb said simply. I can't imagine a future without you. Haven't been able to since Christmas, maybe longer. I was just waiting for the right time to say it. Waiting until I was sure you felt the same way. Waiting until I had something worthy to offer you. I don't need worthy. I need honest. Then here's honest. He knelt down, right there on the floor of her bedroom, and took her hands in his. I love you, Eliza Brennan. I love your strength and your scars and the way you never let anyone make you small. I love that you rode up my mountain with nothing and gave me everything that mattered. I love the way you make this house feel like home, and me feel like something more than just a bank account with a heartbeat. And I'm asking you, not because of Whitmore or gossip or anything except the fact that I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you every single day. Will you marry me? Eliza's tears spilled over. You don't have a ring. I have 47 rings in a box somewhere that I never gave anyone because they weren't you. He smiled through his own emotion. But if you want a ring, I'll get you one. Or we can melt down all 47 and make something new. Something that's just ours. I don't want 47 rings. She pulled him to his feet, cupping his face in her hands. I want the man who burned them. The man who chose to heal instead of hide. The man who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. Is that a yes? That's a yes. She kissed him, and it tasted like tears and laughter, and the promise of every tomorrow they'd ever have. Yes, I'll marry you, not because of scandal or pressure or anyone's opinion except my own. I'll marry you because you're the first person who ever made me feel safe and chosen and worth something more than what I could endure. They held each other in that upstairs bedroom, while outside the February wind howled and inside something perfect and fragile became unbreakable. The next morning, Caleb rode into town alone. He went straight to the jeweler, a quiet man named Samuel Chen, who'd come from San Francisco and had skills that put any craftsman in the territory to shame. I need a ring, Caleb said. Something simple, nothing flashy or expensive looking, something that says partnership, not possession. Samuel studied him for a moment. For Mrs. Brennan? For my fiancée. The word felt good in Caleb's mouth. We're getting married. About time, Samuel smiled. I have something that might work. He pulled out a ring with a simple gold band and a deep red garnet stone. It wasn't diamond or emerald or anything that screamed wealth. It was just honest and beautiful and perfectly Eliza. This one, Caleb said. This is the one. He also stopped at Sheriff Wade's office and made several other arrangements that would either solve their problem or make it spectacularly worse. Either way, he was done letting other people dictate how he lived his life. When he got back to the ranch, he found Marcus and the hands gathered in the barn. They looked up when he entered, and Caleb saw the questions in their eyes. Mrs. Brennan and I are getting married, he said without preamble. We're doing it this weekend, right here on the ranch. You're all invited. In fact, you're required to attend because I'm not doing this without the people who matter. Marcus's weathered face split into a rare grin. Took you long enough, boss. Yeah, well, I'm slow, but I get there eventually. Caleb looked at each of his men. I know some of you are catching heat from your families about Eliza, about the situation here. I'm asking you to stand with us anyway, not because you have to, but because it's right. And if you can't, if the pressure's too much, I'll understand. No hard feelings. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Tommy Reed stepped forward. My pa told me I should quit. Said working for a man who flaunts sin is the same as sinning myself. The young cowboy's jaw was set. I told him to go to hell. You gave me a job when nobody else would, boss. You and Mrs. Brennan both treated me with respect I didn't earn yet. I'll stand with you. Don't care who it bothers. One by one, the other men nodded their agreement. Even the ones Caleb knew went to Whitmore's church. Even the ones with families who'd be upset. All right then. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion he didn't know how to express. Saturday at noon. Tell anyone who wants to come they're welcome. Tell everyone else to mind their own business. The next days were a blur of preparation. Eliza wanted simple. So simple it was. No elaborate ceremony, no expensive reception, just a gathering of people who cared. A promise made under open sky, and the beginning of everything that mattered. The morning of the wedding, Caleb found a letter slipped under his door. It was from his mother, or rather, it had been written by his mother years ago and hidden in a book that Eliza had found while organizing the library. "My darling Caleb," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're grown. I hope you found someone who makes you laugh the way your father makes me laugh, someone who sees past your walls to the good man underneath. Don't let fear keep you from love, son. Don't let one bad experience convince you that all women are the same or that opening your heart means losing yourself. The right woman won't diminish you. She'll multiply you. And when you find her, don't let her go. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the right words. Just choose her every day with everything you are. Love isn't about grand gestures or expensive rings. It's about showing up, about partnership, about being brave enough to be vulnerable with someone who's being brave enough to be vulnerable with you. I love you. Your father loves you. And somewhere out there, there's a woman who will love you too if you let her. Let her, Caleb, please. Don't die alone inside walls you built to protect a heart that was meant to be shared. All my love. Always, Mom." Caleb read it twice, his vision blurring, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. His mother had known. Somehow, she'd known exactly what he'd need to hear. He found Eliza in the kitchen, directing the preparation of food with the efficiency of a general organizing troops. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was sunlight breaking through clouds. "You're not supposed to see me before the wedding," she said. "It's bad luck. We make our own luck." He pulled her into his arms, breathing in the lavender scent of her. "Besides, I couldn't wait. It's only 3 hours. 3 hours too long." She laughed, and the sound filled all the empty spaces in his chest he'd forgotten were there. Noon came bright and cold, the sky that impossible blue that only happens in Montana winter. The ranch hands had set up benches in the space between the house and the barn, and people had come. Not everyone. Whitmore had made sure of that. But Marcus was there with his sister, Tommy Reed and his black eye. The men from the ranch with their families, the ones brave enough to defy the Reverend. Sheriff Wade and his wife, Samuel Chen the jeweler, even a few townspeople who'd decided that love mattered more than scandal. It wasn't a crowd, but it was enough. Caleb stood at the makeshift altar, just a simple wooden arch Marcus had built, wearing his best suit and feeling more nervous than he'd ever been facing down rustlers or market crashes or any of the dangers that came with ranching. Then Eliza appeared in the doorway of the house, and every thought in his head evaporated. She wore a simple dress the color of cream, her dark hair loose around her shoulders for once, instead of braided back. She carried wildflowers Marcus had somehow found in the middle of winter. She was barefoot again, and Caleb's heart cracked open at the symbolism. She'd come to him with nothing, and she was marrying him the same way. No pretense, no performance, just truth. She walked across the snow toward him, her bare feet leaving prints, her eyes locked on his. When she reached him, she handed the flowers to Marcus's sister and took both of Caleb's hands. Sheriff Wade, who'd agreed to officiate since Whitmore obviously wouldn't, cleared his throat. "We're gathered here to witness the marriage of Caleb Harlow and Eliza Brennan. They've written their own vows, so I'll turn it over to them." Caleb took a breath. He'd spent days thinking about what to say, had written and discarded a dozen speeches. In the end, he'd settled on the only thing that mattered. "Eliza," he said, his voice carrying across the cold air. "I spent 10 years building walls because I thought that was the same thing as strength. I thought if I kept everyone out, I couldn't be hurt. And I was right. I couldn't be hurt because I couldn't feel anything at all. Then you showed up on a half-starved horse asking for work, and for the first time in a decade, I felt something. Fear, first. Then curiosity. Then something I didn't have a name for until Christmas. You taught me that strength isn't about walls. It's about knowing when to tear them down. You taught me that trust isn't stupidity if you give it to the right person. And you are the right person. The only person. So I'm promising you, here in front of everyone who matters, that I will choose you every day. I will trust you with my scars and my fears and every broken part of me. I will never weaponize your pain. I will never confuse pride with love. I will be your partner in everything, your equal in all things, and your safe place when the world gets hard. I won't promise perfection because I'm not perfect, but I promise to keep showing up, keep trying, keep loving you with everything I am. This is my vow." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd, and Caleb didn't care. He was too busy watching Eliza, who was crying openly now. "Caleb," she said, her voice steady despite the tears, "I came to Montana with nothing, less than nothing. I'd survived something I thought would break me, and I was just trying to figure out how to keep breathing. Then I met a man who was so busy protecting himself he couldn't see he was dying inside his own armor. You gave me work, respect, a place to belong. But more than that, you gave me a reason to believe that maybe not all men use love as a weapon, that maybe some of them actually know what partnership means. You've proven yourself to me in 1,000 small ways, by making my coffee without asking how I like it, by defending me in Helena, by choosing to hear my warnings even when they scared you, by standing with me in town when it would have been easier to step away. So I'm promising you that I will never stop seeing you clearly. I will never lie to you, even when the truth is hard. I will stand beside you in every battle, but I won't fight them for you because you're strong enough to fight your own. I will be honest about my scars so you never have to wonder what you're healing. And I will love you not despite your walls, but because you trusted me enough to tear them down. This is my vow." Sheriff Wade produced the ring, that simple gold band with the garnet stone, and Caleb slipped it onto Eliza's finger with hands that shook slightly. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana," Wade said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." And he did, there under the Montana sky with snow on the ground, and the people who mattered watching and the future stretching out before them like a promise made and kept. The celebration was small and loud and perfect. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the barn while people ate and laughed and told stories. Caleb danced with his wife, while Marcus called out the steps and Tommy Reed tried not to step on his partner's feet. Near sunset, Caleb and Eliza slipped away from the party, walking up to the hill behind the house where you could see the whole valley spread out below. They stood there together, watching the sun paint the snow in shades of orange and pink. "You know this won't stop the talk," Eliza said quietly. "Whitmore and his people will just find something else to be scandalized about. Let them. We're married now, properly and legally. If they want to keep making trouble, they'll have to find a better reason." Caleb pulled her close. "Besides, I have plans for dealing with the Reverend." "What kind of plans?" "The kind where I buy the land his church sits on and politely inform him that his lease is up for renewal. And the new terms include treating my wife with respect." Eliza laughed. "That's petty and vindictive, and I love it." "I learned from the best." He kissed the top of her head. "You proud of me? For threatening a reverend with eviction? For choosing this? For choosing you, publicly and permanently, even though it's going to make my life more complicated?" "Our life," Eliza corrected. "It's our life now. And yes, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us. We did something brave today." "What's that?" "We chose love over fear. We chose partnership over isolation. We chose to build something real, even though we both know how badly it can hurt when things fall apart." She turned in his arms to face him. "That takes courage, Caleb. The kind of courage that's harder than facing down rustlers or fighting lawsuits. The kind that means being vulnerable every single day and trusting that it won't destroy you." "Think we can do it, long term?" "I think we can do anything as long as we keep choosing each other." She smiled up at him. "Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Behind them, music and laughter drifted up from the barn. In front of them, the sun sank toward the mountains, turning the world gold. And between them, something that had started with nothing but a barefoot woman and a bitter man became everything that mattered. Months later, in late spring when the snow had melted and the world had turned green, Caleb sat on the porch with his morning coffee and watched Eliza work with Marcus on reorganizing the ranch operations. She'd taken over more and more of the business side, and profits were up 20%. She'd also started a network with other ranchers' wives, sharing information and negotiating better collective rates for supplies. She was, in short, making him richer while making herself indispensable to the entire county. And she did it all while making it clear that she was his partner, not his property, his equal, not his subordinate, the woman who'd saved him not by fixing him, but by standing beside him while he fixed himself. Reverend Whitmore had indeed found himself facing new lease terms that included a morality clause about gossip and slander. He'd sputtered and threatened, and eventually moved his services to a smaller building on the edge of town. His congregation had split, with half of them tired of his crusades and the other half following him into self-righteous exile. Caleb felt no guilt about it. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, as Eliza liked to say. Tommy Reed had gotten engaged to a girl from the next county over who didn't care what her reverend thought. Marcus's sister had started coming to Sunday dinners and had announced she was moving to Blackstone permanently. The ranch was growing, thriving, becoming more than just a business. It was becoming a community. And at the center of it all was Eliza, the barefoot widow who'd asked for nothing and given him everything. "What are you thinking about?" She appeared beside him, stealing his coffee cup and taking a sip. "You, us. How different things are from a year ago." "You mean when you were burning rings and rejecting proposals?" "Exactly that." He pulled her down onto his lap, ignoring her protest about propriety. "I was so convinced I knew what love looked like. Thought it had to be grand gestures and perfect moments, and someone who fit into the life I'd already built. And instead you got a broke widow with trust issues and a talent for finding fraud. I got a partner who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. I got someone who makes me better without trying to change me. I got the thing I didn't know I needed." He kissed her softly. "I got you." Eliza's eyes shimmered. "You know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "You're not the richest man in Montana anymore. That honor belongs to whoever bought the Henderson place." Caleb laughed. "And how do you feel about that?" "Relieved. Now when people look at us, they see a couple who works hard, not a poor woman who married rich." She settled more comfortably against him. "Though you're still plenty wealthy, don't worry." "I'm not worried. The wealthiest thing I own isn't land or cattle or money in the bank." He tightened his arms around her. "It's you. The woman who rode up my mountain with nothing but truth and changed everything." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the spring sky, drinking coffee and planning the day ahead. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity, cattle lowing, men calling to each other, the sound of hammers as they built a new barn. It was loud and busy and complicated and messy and absolutely perfect. Because Caleb Harlow, the man who'd once burned 47 rings because he couldn't believe love was real, had finally found something worth more than all his wealth and property combined. He'd found a partner, an equal, a woman who chose him not for what he owned, but for who he was underneath the armor. And this time, he'd kept the ring. Not in a box or a safe, but on her finger where it belonged. A simple gold band with a garnet stone that meant more than all the diamonds he'd ever rejected combined. Because it was honest, it was real, and it was theirs. Just like everything they'd built together. One careful choice at a time, one day of showing up at a time, one moment of choosing love over fear at a time. The barefoot woman who'd changed everything smiled against his chest, and Caleb smiled back. And somewhere in the Montana mountains, two broken people who'd learned to heal together watched the future unfold with hope instead of fear. And that, more than wealth or land or any measure the world could offer, was exactly what happily ever after looked like.